Before we dive into one of the most overlooked yet critical stories of World War II, I want you to do something for me. If you appreciate these untold stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the midst of war, hit that subscribe button right now. These stories matter, and your support helps keep them alive. Now, let's talk about a man who saved lives without ever firing a shot. France, September 1944. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the corrugated zinc roof of the ammunition depot with a monotonous rhythm that wore down even the toughest men. Sergeant Michael Harrison stood in the doorway of the Quonset hut that served as the depot office, watching mud-caked deuce-and-a-half trucks line up in the darkness, their headlights blacked out except for narrow slits of yellow light. The war had moved beyond Normandy's beaches, but the real battle here, 30 miles inland, was against time, chaos, and exhaustion. Harrison was 32, older than most sergeants, with graying temples and crow's feet that deepened when he squinted through cigarette smoke. Before the war, he'd managed a warehouse in Detroit. His wife used to joke that he could organize a tornado if given enough time. Now, standing in the French rain with the smell of diesel fuel and wet canvas heavy in the air, he wished organizing this depot was as simple as stacking automobile parts. The depot covered 12 acres of muddy farmland requisitioned from a French family who now lived in 2 rooms above the old stone barn. Every day, supply convoys arrived from the ports, dumping crates of ammunition, grenades, mortar rounds, and small arms cartridges faster than the depot could process them. Every night, trucks from the front lines rolled in desperate for resupply. Between arrival and departure, chaos reigned. Harrison flicked his cigarette into a puddle and walked toward the main warehouse. His boots made sucking sounds in the mud with each step. Inside, the warehouse was a cacophony of shouting voices, forklift engines, and crates scraping across concrete. Corporal Jimmy Davis, a skinny kid from Alabama with perpetual dark circles under his eyes, nearly collided with Harrison carrying a manifest clipboard. "Sergeant, we got another holdup at Bay 3, Davis said, his voice tight with frustration. 2 trucks trying to load at the same spot, and now there's a jeep stuck behind them that needs to get through for priority medical supplies." Harrison nodded. This was the 3rd backup today, and it wasn't even noon. He pushed past a group of tired soldiers hand-trucking ammunition crates and made his way to Bay 3. Sure enough, 2 deuce-and-a-halves sat nose to tail, their drivers standing in the rain arguing while a jeep idled behind them, its driver leaning on the horn. All right, knock it off," Harrison called out, his voice cutting through the noise. The drivers turned, one of them a red-faced private who looked about ready to throw a punch. "You," Harrison pointed at the first truck, "back up to Bay 5. You," he pointed at the second, "wait here. And you," he addressed the jeep driver, "go around through the motor pool exit." The red-faced private opened his mouth to protest. "Sergeant, I've been waiting 20 minutes already and you'll wait another 5 or you can explain to your CO why his men didn't get ammunition tonight," Harrison said, his tone flat but final. The private swallowed his complaint and climbed back into his truck. As the vehicles slowly untangled themselves, Harrison stood in the rain watching. Around him, the depot pulsed with barely contained chaos. Soldiers pushed handcarts loaded with crates down narrow aisles between towering stacks of ammunition. Forklifts backed up and turned, their operators shouting warnings that went unheard in the din. Supply clerks ran back and forth with manifests, trying to match requisitions to inventory while trucks idled in haphazard lines, burning precious fuel. This wasn't just inefficiency. This was men on the front lines running low on ammunition, waiting in foxholes for supplies that sat less than an hour away but couldn't get through the bottleneck fast enough. Harrison had seen the casualty reports. He'd watched medics load wounded men onto ambulances in the dark. Every minute wasted here was a minute someone at the front didn't have. That night, after the last supply run departed, Harrison sat in the depot office with a pot of weak coffee and a stack of manifests. Lieutenant Brennan, the depot commander, had already gone to sleep in his quarters. The young lieutenant was competent enough but overwhelmed, happy to let his senior sergeant handle day-to-day operations. Harrison spread the manifests across the desk and started calculating. On average, they were processing 48 trucks per 12-hour shift. Each truck took approximately 15 minutes from arrival to loaded departure. But that was the average, and averages lied. Some trucks were in and out in 8 minutes. Others sat for 45 minutes or more, caught in traffic jams, waiting for clear access to loading bays, or stuck behind slower operations. Harrison pulled out a pencil and a sheet of paper. He drew a rough map of the depot layout from memory, marking the main entrance, the 6 loading bays, the ammunition storage areas, and the exit that fed back to the main road. Then he traced the path trucks currently took. They entered through the main gate, drove to whichever bay looked open, loaded, and then had to navigate back through incoming traffic to reach the exit. He stared at the drawing for a long moment, then grabbed a red pencil and started drawing arrows. One-way traffic. Dedicated entrance. Dedicated exit. Staging areas where trucks could wait without blocking active bays. It was so simple it made him angry he hadn't thought of it sooner. But thinking it and implementing it were different things. He'd need to reorganize the entire depot flow in the middle of active operations. He'd need paint or chalk to mark routes. He'd need signs, probably made from scrap wood. He'd need to convince a crew of exhausted men to change a system they'd adapted to, even if that system was broken. And he'd need to do it fast, because every day they waited was another day of inefficiency costing lives. The next morning, Harrison gathered his team in the depot office before the first convoy arrived. There were 8 of them: Davis, Corporal Mike Sullivan who ran the motor pool, Private First Class Rodriguez who managed the storage areas, and 5 other enlisted men who handled loading operations. They crowded into the small space, bringing the smell of wet wool and tobacco. "All right, listen up," Harrison said, standing in front of his hand-drawn map now pinned to the wall. "We're redesigning depot traffic flow starting today. We're creating one-way aisles, dedicated staging areas, and separate entrance and exit routes." Sullivan, a stocky man from Boston with a perpetual skeptical expression, crossed his arms. "Sarge, we're barely keeping up as it is. How are we supposed to reorganize while trucks are still rolling in?" "We do it in phases," Harrison said. "First phase, we mark the main traffic lanes with chalk. White lines showing the one-way flow from entrance to bays to exit. Second phase, we set up the staging areas with signs. Third phase, we enforce it. Any truck that doesn't follow the new system gets redirected, no exceptions." "What about the French civilians?" Rodriguez asked. He was the youngest of the group, barely 19, but sharp. "They still use that barn access road that cuts through the motor pool." Harrison had thought about this. The French family who owned this land before the army requisitioned it still needed access to their barn and the small plot where they kept chickens. "We coordinate with them. I'll talk to Monsieur Dubois this morning. We'll schedule their access during our low traffic periods." "Davis, you speak some French, right?" "Un peu," Davis said with a shrug. "Enough to get by." "But you'll help me explain it to them." The meeting broke up with more grumbling than enthusiasm, but Harrison had expected that. Change always met resistance, especially when everyone was already operating on empty. As the team filed out, Sullivan lingered. "You really think this'll make a difference, Sarge?" he asked quietly. Harrison met his eyes. "Mike, yesterday we had 3 near accidents, 2 fights between drivers, and we sent 4 trucks back to the front half loaded because we couldn't get them processed in time." "Yeah, I think it'll make a difference." Sullivan nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in. But if this goes sideways, you're buying first round when we get leave in Paris." "Deal." By 0800 hours, Harrison had a bucket of white chalk paint liberated from the motor pool and a crew of 2 soldiers helping him mark traffic lanes. They started at the main entrance, painting thick white lines along the dirt and gravel paths that served as depot roads. The rain had stopped, but everything was still wet, making the paint dilute and run. They had to apply 3 coats to make the lines visible. Trucks started arriving at 0830. At first, drivers ignored the new lines, following their old habitual routes. Harrison stationed himself at the entrance with Davis, personally directing each truck to follow the marked path. Some drivers were cooperative. Others weren't. "This is bullshit, Sarge," one corporal from a frontline unit said, leaning out his truck window. "I've been coming here for 2 months. I know where I'm going." Not anymore, you don't, Harrison said firmly. Follow the white line to Bay 4. You'll load faster, I promise. The corporal muttered something under his breath but followed the marked route. Harrison watched as the truck navigated the new path, arriving at Bay 4 where Rodriguez had a load of 105mm howitzer shells already staged and waiting. The truck was loaded and moving toward the exit in under 10 minutes. By midday, they'd completed the basic lane markings and set up 2 staging areas, essentially widened sections of road where trucks could pull over and wait without blocking traffic. Harrison had also convinced the carpenters at the engineer battalion camp down the road to make 6 wooden signs with painted arrows and text: entrance only, exit only, Bay 1 to 3, Bay 4 to 6, staging area A, staging area B. The afternoon brought new problems. An ammunition pallet broke apart when a forklift operator took a corner too fast, spilling boxes of .30 caliber cartridges across the one-way lane near Bay 2. Traffic backed up immediately. Harrison grabbed 2 soldiers and they spent 20 minutes gathering loose ammunition and clearing the path while drivers sat in their trucks, engines idling, fuel burning. Then there was the incident with Monsieur Dubois. The elderly Frenchman, who spoke no English, arrived at the depot entrance in his ancient Citroën truck at 1,500 hours, right during peak traffic, and found his usual shortcut blocked by the new traffic pattern. Davis tried to explain the situation in his broken French, but Dubois was having none of it. He gestured emphatically at his barn, visible across the motor pool area, and started to drive around the blockade. Harrison had to physically step in front of the truck to stop him. Davis continued negotiating while Harrison stood in the rain again, this time facing down a 70-year-old French farmer who'd already lost his land once to the Germans and wasn't about to let Americans push him around too. Finally, Davis found the right words. Il de que ses poules ont besoin de manger, he translated. His chickens need feeding. Harrison closed his eyes for a moment, then gestured for Dubois to follow him. They worked out a compromise. Dubois could use the service road next to the Quonset huts, which bypassed the main traffic flow, but he had to come before 0800 or after 1800 when traffic was lighter. Harrison even helped him unload chicken feed from his truck as a peace offering. That night, Harrison sat in the office again with fresh manifests. They'd processed 51 trucks in the 12-hour shift, 3 more than yesterday, but still not the improvement he'd hoped for. The system was better, but not yet good. He studied the flow charts he'd made, tracking where trucks still bunched up, where delays occurred, where the new lanes weren't quite right. The problem was bay assignment. Trucks were still choosing bays randomly based on what looked open, which meant specialized loads sometimes went to the wrong bay, requiring last-minute shifts of personnel and equipment. Harrison needed a dispatcher system, someone at the entrance directing trucks to specific bays based on their load requirements. He also noticed that trucks leaving the depot were exiting through the same narrow gap as before, creating a choke point even though the loading process itself had sped up. The exit needed to be wider, with 2 lanes instead of 1. By the second day, Harrison's plan had evolved into something more sophisticated. He created a dispatcher station at the entrance, just a folding table under a tarp with a clipboard and a radio. Private Martinez, who had a loud voice and a no-nonsense attitude, became the traffic dispatcher. Every truck that arrived got directed to a specific bay based on their load requirements. Small arms ammunition to bays 1 and 2, artillery shells to bays 3 and 4, grenades and explosives to bays 5 and 6. The crew also widened the exit by removing a section of fence and grading the road shoulder with a borrowed bulldozer. Now 2 trucks could exit simultaneously, doubling the exit flow. But the changes created new friction. Sullivan's motor pool mechanics complained that the new traffic pattern meant they had to walk farther to reach broken-down vehicles. Rodriguez's loading crews grumbled about being assigned specific bays instead of working wherever they felt like it. There was resistance to the dispatcher system too. Some drivers felt insulted being told where to go instead of figuring it out themselves. Harrison spent most of the second day troubleshooting these human problems. He walked the entire depot circuit multiple times, timing each segment, watching how his changes played out in practice versus theory. He adjusted staging area positions twice. He moved signage 3 times before finding optimal visibility. Around 1,600 hours, An air raid siren wailed across the valley. The depot had been bombed once already, back in August, and everyone still flinched at the sound. Work stopped immediately. Trucks turned off their engines. Soldiers grabbed their helmets and ran for slit trenches dug around the depot perimeter. Harrison and his crew dove into the nearest trench, a muddy ditch that smelled like stagnant water and rotting leaves. They sat there for 45 minutes while Allied fighters chased off a lone German reconnaissance plane that had strayed too far west. When the all-clear sounded, everyone emerged muddy and shaken. But instead of resuming the old chaos, the new system held. Martinez returned to his dispatcher station. Drivers restarted their engines and followed the marked lanes. The crews went back to their assigned base. That's when Harrison knew it would work. The system had survived its first major disruption and people had defaulted to the new pattern instead of the old chaos. Humans were creatures of habit. You just had to make the new habit stick long enough to become automatic. By the end of the second day, 48 hours after Harrison had first drawn his arrows on paper, the depot processed 63 trucks in a 12-hour shift. Harrison did the math 3 times to make sure. 63 versus 48 baseline. That was 15 additional trucks, a 31% increase in throughput. He walked through the depot after the last truck departed around midnight. The rain had finally stopped. Stars showed through gaps in the clouds overhead. His boots still squelched in the mud, but the marked lanes were clearly visible even in the darkness. The staging areas sat empty and ready for tomorrow. The exit lane was clear. Davis found him standing near Bay 3, just looking at the organized space that had been chaos 2 days ago. "We did it, Sarge," the young corporal said. "We did," Harrison agreed. "Now we have to maintain it." That was the real challenge, he knew. Anyone could organize something once. Keeping it organized required discipline, consistency, and leadership. It required convincing tired men that following the system was better than cutting corners. It required fixing problems before they became crises. It required giving a damn when it was easier not to. The next morning, Lieutenant Brennan called Harrison into the office. The young officer looked surprised, which was never a good sign. "Sergeant, I just got off the radio with Division Supply. They're asking questions about our throughput numbers." Harrison's stomach tightened. Questions from Division usually meant someone thought you were fudging reports. "Sir, the numbers are accurate. We implemented a new traffic management system and..." Brennan held up a hand, smiling. "Relax, Sergeant. They're not questioning the numbers. They're impressed. They want to know how we did it so they can implement similar systems at other depots." He paused. "How did we do it?" Harrison explained the one-way lanes, the staging areas, the dispatcher system, the bay assignments. Brennan listened, nodding occasionally, jotting notes. When Harrison finished, the lieutenant leaned back in his chair. "Sergeant, when I took this command, they told me to keep the ammunition flowing and try not to blow anything up. Nobody said anything about innovation." He smiled. "Good work. Really good work. I'm putting you in for a commendation." Harrison felt uncomfortable with praise. "Sir, the crew did the work. Davis, Sullivan, Rodriguez, Martinez, all of them. They made it happen." "Then I'll make sure they're all mentioned," Brennan said. "But this was your idea, Sergeant. Own it." The commendation never came. Paperwork got lost somewhere between the depot and division headquarters, probably buried under more urgent matters like casualty reports and ammunition shortages at the front. Harrison didn't mind. The real reward came every evening when he watched trucks roll out loaded and ready, carrying ammunition to soldiers who needed it, getting there faster because someone had bothered to draw arrows with chalk and enforce a traffic pattern. Over the next weeks, the system evolved. They added a third staging area. They installed actual painted signs made by the engineers. They trained new soldiers on the traffic pattern when replacements arrived. Word spread to other depots, and Harrison found himself visited by sergeants and officers from supply units up and down the supply line, all wanting to see the organized depot everyone was talking about. One evening in October, a major from Quartermaster Corps showed up unannounced. He walked the entire depot circuit with Harrison, asking detailed questions about implementation challenges, resistance to change, measurable outcomes. At the end of the tour, he shook Harrison's hand. "Sergeant, do you know how many tons of ammunition we're moving through France every day?" the major asked. "No, sir. Thousands. Tens of thousands. And we're barely keeping up with demand. Your system here, this seems small, just one depot, but if we implement this at every depot between here and the ports, we might move an extra 30% more supplies. That's thousands of additional tons reaching the front lines. That's lives saved." Harrison didn't know what to say to that. He'd just been trying to solve the problem in front of him. He hadn't thought about the bigger picture, about how one small improvement could cascade across the entire supply chain. But that night, lying on his cot in the Quonset hut, listening to rain return to drum against the zinc roof, he thought about it. He thought about the soldiers at the front who'd have ammunition because a truck got loaded 10 minutes faster. He thought about the machine gunner who wouldn't run out of ammo in the middle of a firefight. He thought about the artillery crew that could provide covering fire because their shells arrived on time. War wasn't just about who fired the most bullets. It was about who could get bullets to the guns faster. It was about logistics, supply chains, efficiency, and 1,000 small decisions that determined whether soldiers lived or died. Most people would never know that. They'd read about generals and battles and great strategic decisions. They wouldn't read about a sergeant in a muddy depot who drew arrows with chalk. But Harrison knew. His crew knew. And that was enough. By November, the depot was processing an average of 65 trucks per 12-hour shift, maintaining the improvement even as winter set in and conditions worsened. The system had become ingrained, the new normal. New soldiers learned it from day one. Drivers knew the pattern before they even arrived. The French family navigated around it without complaint, having worked out a comfortable rhythm with the Army's operations. One afternoon, Davis approached Harrison while he was inspecting ammunition crates for water damage. "Sarge, I got orders. I'm shipping out to a port battalion in Antwerp." Harrison felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd lost good soldiers before to transfers, injuries, illness. Davis had been with him from the beginning, had helped paint those first white lines, had negotiated with French farmers and directed traffic, and never complained even when everything seemed impossible. "When?" Harrison asked. "Day after tomorrow." They stood there for a moment in the warehouse, surrounded by stacks of ammunition and the smell of gun oil and damp wood. "You did good work here, Corporal," Harrison said finally. "Really good work." Davis nodded, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "Just following orders, Sarge." "No," Harrison said. "You did more than that. You believed in something better when it would have been easier to keep doing things the wrong way. That matters." After Davis left, Harrison walked to the depot office and pulled out the original drawing he'd made that first night, the simple map with red arrows showing one-way traffic flow. It looked crude now compared to the actual implemented system, but it contained the seed of the idea. He folded it carefully and put it in his footlocker. Someday after the war, he'd look at it and remember. Remember the rain and the mud and the exhaustion. Remember the resistance and the small victories. Remember the trucks rolling through organized lanes instead of chaotic tangles. Remember the knowledge that somewhere out there, a soldier had ammunition because this system worked. That was the truth about war that nobody talked about. It wasn't won by heroes charging machine gun nests, though that happened and mattered. It was won by thousands of ordinary people doing ordinary jobs a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit smarter than the enemy. It was won by sergeants who stayed up late with coffee and manifests, figuring out how to move crates more efficiently. It was won by corporals who directed traffic in the rain without complaining. It was won by privates who loaded trucks at midnight when they should have been sleeping. The war would be won or lost in places like this, in muddy depots behind the lines, in decisions about traffic patterns and staging areas and exit lanes. And nobody would ever know, except the people who were there. Harrison lit a cigarette and walked to the entrance of the depot, watching the afternoon convoy arrive. Martinez was at the dispatcher station, directing trucks with practiced efficiency. The white lines were freshly painted, clear and bright even in the fading daylight. Everything flowed smoothly, each vehicle moving through the system like blood through veins, carrying life to soldiers who needed it. Somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the depot, Beyond the supply lines and the artillery positions and the fortified towns, men sat in foxholes waiting for ammunition. They didn't know about chalk lines and traffic patterns. They didn't know about Sergeant Michael Harrison or Corporal Jimmy Davis or any of the crew who made this depot work. They just knew that when they radioed for resupply, it arrived. And that was enough. That's the story nobody tells about war. The unglamorous truth about supply sergeants and traffic patterns and 31% improvements that saved lives. If you found this story meaningful, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who appreciates history. These stories matter. The people who lived them matter. And as long as we keep telling these stories, they'll never be forgotten. I'll see you in the next one.